The girl had spilled water on the marble. That was all. A child of 9, carrying a glass across a room too large for her, had let a few drops slide over the rim and darken a hand's width of the polished floor. In any ordinary house it would have earned a cloth and a shrug. In the Hall of Isolde, on the night the Kingdom of Eldermoor gathered to honor the founding of the Harrowgate line, it earned Princess Malin something else entirely, and I watched it happen from my post beside the eastern doors, and I did not move, because I was not yet permitted to. My name is Callan Vaste. I had stood the consort's details for 4 years by then, and I had learned the first lesson of the palace guard so thoroughly that it had become a second skin. You are furniture with a pulse. You see everything. You are seen by no one. You hold the wall, you hold your face, and you hold your tongue, and the holding is the whole of the duty. I had held it through 100 slights I would rather not have. I would hold it, I told myself that evening, through whatever this was. I could not have told you then how badly I would fail at holding it before the night was done, nor how glad I would be, all my life after, that I had. The Queen Consort saw the water before anyone else did. Morwenna always saw the wrong thing first. It was a gift she had, a talent for locating the flaw in a room the way a magpie finds the one bright thing in a hedge. She had been Queen Consort for 6 years, since the king had married her 2 winters after the late Queen Isolde was laid to rest, and in those 6 years she had turned the noticing of flaws into an instrument of governance. She noticed a footman's crooked cuff, and he was gone by morning. She noticed a lady's borrowed jewels, and the lady was never asked back. Now she noticed a wet patch of marble and a small girl standing over it with an emptying glass, and I saw her chin lift, and I felt the whole eastern side of the hall go careful, the way a field goes still before weather. Malin, the consort said the name the way one sets down something distasteful. Come here. The child came. That was the thing about Malin that always undid me a little. She came when she was called, every time, even when the voice calling her carried nothing good. She was the late Queen's daughter, and she had her mother's gray eyes and her mother's straight small back, and she crossed that vast lit hall under the eyes of 400 guests with the water glass still in her 2 hands because no one had told her to put it down. She was wearing the pale blue she wore for occasions. Her hair had been braided by someone who loved her that morning, and by evening one plait had come loose at the temple, and it was that loose plait, more than anything, that made her look 9 years old and alone. Do you see what you have done? The consort did not phrase it as a question. She gestured with one ringed hand at the darkened marble, and the gesture was for the room, not the girl. In your mother's hall, on this of all nights, do you see it? I'm sorry, Malin said. Her voice was very small and very clear. I'll wipe it. You'll wipe it. Morwenna repeated the words as though they were an absurdity, and a few of the nearer guests produced the small laugh that people give when a powerful person invites them to. With what, child? Your gown, your sleeve. You will get down on the floor of the founding banquet and clean it with your sleeve, will you, like a scullery girl? I want to be exact about what happened next, because a great deal turned on it, and I have gone over it more times than I can count. Malin did not answer. She looked at the water and she looked at the consort, and something crossed her small face that was not defiance. Malin was not a defiant child, but was worse for the consort than defiance, because it was confusion. The girl genuinely did not understand what she was being asked to atone for. She had spilled a little water. She had offered to clean it. She could not find, anywhere in her 9 years of experience, the crime that would justify the size of the voice being used on her, and her not understanding showed on her face, and Morwenna read it as insolence. That was the match to the tinder. You look at me, the consort said, and her voice dropped into the register that was, in some ways, more frightening than shouting, the way your mother used to look at me. As though this house were still hers. It is not. She is gone, Malin. She has been gone a long time, and the sooner you understand that the roof over your head, the food on your plate, the very braid in your hair are given to you now by grace, the sooner you will learn to be grateful and to be careful and to be small. She let that sit. You are not a queen's daughter here. You are a guest. Try to remember it. 400 people heard it. I heard the intake of breath from the tables nearest the dais. Lady Verena, the consort's own daughter, went still with a wine cup halfway to her mouth. Even she had not expected the mother of the house to say a thing like that aloud, on this night, to a child. Somewhere down the long room a fork touched a plate, and the small sound was enormous. And Malin stood there holding her glass of water in a hall named for her dead mother, and was told, in front of the assembled realm, that she was a guest in her own home. She did not cry. I have thought a great deal about the fact that she did not cry. A child who cries is a child who still expects the crying to work, who believes, somewhere, that grief has a market and that the grown people around her will pay it. Malin did not cry because she had learned, in 6 years of this woman, that it would not work, that tears in this house were simply one more flaw to be noticed. So she stood, and she went pale, and she looked at the floor, and the loose plate hung at her temple, and I felt something in my chest that a guard is not supposed to feel on duty, which is the specific hot pressure of a wrong that you are watching and not stopping. Let me tell you the rule, so you understand the size of what I broke. A palace guard does not speak in the presence of the royal family unless spoken to on a matter of security. He does not offer opinion. He does not take a side in the household. He is the king's, and through the king the crown's, and he holds the wall as an extension of the crown's dignity, which means his silence is not cowardice but office. The moment a guard becomes a man with views, the wall is no longer a wall. I believed that. I still believe it. I had built 4 years of good service on it. To break it in the founding banquet in front of the realm against the Queen Consort of Eldermoor was to end my career in a sentence, and I knew that as surely as I knew my own name, and I want you to hold that knowledge alongside the story, because it is the reason the story is worth telling. What I did that night, I did knowing the cost of it precisely. I did not lose my temper. Losing your temper is cheap. I paid. But I am ahead of myself. I have not yet told you how I came to be standing there, or why a wet patch of marble undid 4 years of discipline, or what 9 words a man can possibly find that would be worth a life's work to say. And to tell you those things I have to take you back, not far, only 3 months, to the first time I understood what the consort was doing to the child, and why no one in the palace would stop it. I came to the consort's detail the way most men come to postings they would not have chosen. I was good, and my being good was inconvenient to someone. Before the palace I had served 11 years in the marches, on the western frontier, where the guard is not ceremonial and the discipline is not for show. I had brought men through a bad winter and a worse spring, and I had been decorated for a night on the Fenmark Bridge that I do not care to describe, and when the frontier quieted and the regiment thinned, my colonel, a hard, fair man named Oswin Furs, recommended me for the palace guard as though it were a reward. It was, I suppose. It was also a filing away. A man who has done difficult things in difficult places makes the peacetime officers uneasy. He is a reminder of a register they would rather not sing in. The palace is where you put such a man so that his medals can be admired and his opinions never solicited. I did not mind. I had a daughter of my own back in the marches, being raised by her aunt after my wife's death, and the palace pay was steady and the palace was safe, and I told myself that a season of standing still would do me good. I learned the ceremonial drill. I learned the bearskin and the white gloves and the 40-minute stretch of absolute stillness that turns a young guard's legs to fire and an old one's mind to water. I learned which corridors were watched and which were not. And I was assigned, after 2 years of proving I could hold a wall, to the household detail of the Queen Consort, which everyone told me was a plum, and which I understood within a month to be a punishment that the men who assigned it did not know they were giving. because the Queen Consort's household was not a happy one, and the unhappiness had a shape, and the shape was a 9-year-old girl. Princess Malin was the only living child of the late Queen Isolde, King Alaric's first wife, who had died when Malin was 3 of the slow illness that the court still spoke of in lowered voices. I had never met Isolde. By every account she had been the best of the Harrowgate line in a generation, clever, plain-spoken, loved by the common people in a way that royalty is not often loved, more comfortable in a stable or a schoolroom than a throne room. The king had married her for policy, and, the older servants said, had come to love her past all policy, and when she died something went out of him that had not come back. He was an honorable man, Alaric, and an aging one, and grief had made him passive in the exact place where a father most needs to be active. The raising of the child the dead woman had left behind. 2 years after Isolde, he married Morwenna. I do not know what the king saw in her. I have opinions I will keep. What matters is that Morwenna came into the palace as Queen Consort with 2 grown children of her own, Lord Cassius and Lady Verena, and a very clear and patient understanding of the one obstacle between her line and the full weight of the crown. That obstacle was not the crown Prince Rowan, Alaric's grown heir by Isolde, who was a decent grave man well able to guard himself. The obstacle was small and motherless and entirely without a champion. The obstacle was Malin. You do not, if you are clever, harm such a child. Morwenna was very clever. You do not strike her, or starve her, or lock her away. Those are the crimes of stupid stepmothers in old tales, and they leave marks, and marks bring justice. What you do, if you are Morwenna, is smaller and far more patient. You correct her endlessly in front of others until the whole court learns to see her as a problem to be managed. You praise your own children in her hearing and find her always a little wanting by comparison. You give her the plainer rooms, the older governess, the seat below the salt, and you do it all with such reasonableness, such apparent care for her improvement, that anyone who objects seems the unreasonable one. You do not break the child. You shrink her. You teach the court, one dinner at a time, that the late Queen's daughter is nobody in particular. And you teach the child the same lesson, which is the crueler half of the work, because a child believes what the whole world agrees on. I watched this for 3 months before the founding banquet, and it made me ill, and there was nothing in my office that permitted me to do anything about it at all. That is the part outsiders never understand. They imagine that a strong man who sees a wrong simply stops it, but I was not the child's father, nor her guardian, nor anyone withstanding to speak. I was a wall. The father who should have stopped it was locked in his grief. The brother who might have stopped it was away at the northern garrison half the year. The one adult with both the standing and the spine, the king's sister, Princess Adela, a formidable old campaigner who did not like Morwenna and did not trouble to hide it, was abroad on the state visit to the southern courts, and had been for 2 months, and was not due back for 3 more. The child had no one. And I, who had stood on the Fenmark Bridge and not moved while the water rose, learned that there is a helplessness worse than the frontier. It is the helplessness of watching a small cruelty done slowly, in a warm, bright room, by people who will smile at you afterward, and knowing that the only weapon you have is a silence you are sworn to keep. So I kept it. For 3 months I kept it. And I would perhaps have kept it that night too, and this would be a different and a sadder story if the child had not, 2 weeks before the banquet, done a thing that changed everything between us, a small thing, which is how the largest things usually begin. It was raining, the day it began, and I was on the west colonnade, the long covered walk between the consort's wing and the old library, where I stood 4 hours of every wet afternoon watching a garden that no one visited in the rain. It is the loneliest post in the palace. It is also, for the same reason, the one place where a person who does not wish to be seen might go, and I had noticed over my 3 months that a small figure went there often, in weather that kept everyone else indoors, down to the far end of the colonnade, to a stone bench under a carved lintel, out of the sight lines of every window that mattered. Malin, of course it was Malin. The child had found, without anyone teaching her, the one spot in a palace full of eyes where no eyes fell, and she went there to do the thing she was not permitted to do anywhere she might be seen, which was simply to sit still and be a child, and not be corrected for it. I never spoke to her. That was the rule, and I kept it. But a wall notices, and I noticed that she came with a book, always the same book, a battered green one she kept inside her coat to hide from the wet, and I suspected from the consort, who thought reading a poor use of a princess who ought to be practicing her posture. I noticed that she read with her lips moving, the way children do who are still climbing into the harder words. I noticed that she talked, very quietly, to something in the garden, a particular blackbird, it turned out, that had a nest in the wisteria, and that she had, in the private economy of a lonely child, made into a friend. I noticed all of it, and I said nothing, because saying something was not my office, and because I told myself she was better left with the 1 hour of peace the palace allowed her than reminded, by a guard's attention, that even here she was watched. Then, on the day I mean, she stopped in front of me on her way in. She had never done that. She stopped, and she looked up. I am a tall man, and she was a small girl, and she had to tip her head right back, and she said, in the clear, grave voice I would come to know, "You stand here every rainy day." I did not answer. A guard does not. "You never move," she said. "I watched. Once for a whole hour you never even looked at the bird." She considered this. "I thought you might be a kind of statue they wind up. But statues don't get cold, and your ears are red." Still I said nothing, and held my eyes forward, and it cost me more than any silence I had held in that palace, because she was not mocking me the way the tourists at the front gate mocked the guards, waving hands in front of our faces, trying to make us laugh. She was doing the opposite. She had spent, I understood, real attention on the fact of me. In a house where no one looked at her, the lonely child had looked, carefully, at the one other person who was also required to be furniture, and had recognized in him a fellow prisoner of stillness. She was not trying to break my discipline. She was, in her strange, grave way, keeping me company in it. "You don't have to talk," she said, as though reassuring me. "I know you're not allowed." My mother's guards weren't allowed either, but she used to say, and here the child's voice did a small brave thing, steadied itself over the word mother the way a foot steadies on a loose stone. She used to say that the guards who stand the stillest are the ones with the most going on inside. "So I expect you have a great deal going on inside, even if your face doesn't show it." She nodded, satisfied with her theory. "I won't tell anyone you're really a person. It can be a secret." And she went in out of the rain to sit with her book and her blackbird, and left me standing on the colonnade with my eyes forward and my discipline intact, and something behind my ribs that had not been touched in a long time. She came back the next wet day and the next. She never asked me to answer. She simply talked a few minutes on her way in, a few on her way out, a running quiet report of a 9-year-old's world, delivered to the one adult in the palace who would not correct, contradict, praise, or repeat a word of it. I learned, standing there saying nothing, the whole shape of her small life. I learned that her governess was the consort's choosing and reported everything. I learned that on the nights there were guests she was sometimes forgotten at dinner and went to bed without, and had trained herself not to mind. I learned the name of the blackbird, which I will not tell you, because it was hers. And I learned this on a gray afternoon when she stood a long time before going in, that she had begun to believe the thing the consort was teaching her. "Do you think," she asked the garden, not quite looking at me, "that a person can be a princess if nobody treats them like one? Or does it stop being true, like when you say a word too many times and it stops meaning anything?" She turned the green book over in her hands, because I looked it up. In the book, it says a princess is the daughter of a king or queen, and my mother was a queen, so it should still be true even if she stopped. She was a truthful child, and she would not say a thing she did not know to be true, and she did not know any longer that it was still true, and the not knowing was in her face. And I stood there and held the wall and let a child ask me the one question in the world I most wanted to answer, and answered it with silence. That was the day I began to hate the wall. I want to be fair to myself and to the office. The silence had a reason, and the reason was sound. If every guard decided for himself which household quarrels were worth breaking rank over, the guard would become a faction, and a palace with a factional guard is a palace one bad night from disaster. I had seen, on the frontier, what happens when armed men decide they know better than their orders, and it is never the thing the storytellers promise. The wall protects the child in the long run precisely by not being a man with opinions in the short one. I believed that. I did not stop believing it. But there is a difference. I learned that autumn between believing a rule and hiding behind it, and the difference is this. The rule is meant to keep you from acting on your worst impulses, not your best. And I had begun to suspect that when the day came, and I felt it coming, the way you feel whether I would have to choose which the rule was serving, and that I had better decide in advance in the cold what I would do so that I did not have to decide it hot. So I decided. On the gray afternoon the child asked me whether a princess stops being a princess. I decided that if the moment ever came where a single true thing said aloud would give this child back to herself, I would say it and take whatever came, and count it the best day's work of my life. I decided it the way you decide the hard things, quietly, alone, with no one to witness the deciding. And then I put it away, and stood my posts and waited and told no one, least of all the child. It came sooner than I thought, and larger, and in front of the whole realm. The founding banquet is the oldest fixed night in the Eldermoor year. It marks the evening, 4 centuries gone, when the first of the Harrowgate line was raised by acclaim in the very hall where we now dine, and the crown makes much of it. The whole senior court assembles. The great plate comes out of the vaults. The king says the old words over the old cup, and the realm is reminded, once a year, of the thread that runs unbroken from that founding night to this one. It is a night about continuity. About the line. About who belongs to it and who does not. I mention this so that you will understand why the consort chose it of all nights to make her point about the child. Because Morwenna never did anything by accident, and to humiliate the late queen's daughter on the one night the realm gathered to celebrate the bloodline was not a loss of temper. It was a message, sent to 400 witnesses, about whose line would carry Eldermoor forward and whose had ended. I was on the eastern doors. I had drawn the banquet detail 3 days before, and had felt, reading my name on the roster, the particular cold that a man feels when he suspects the moment he has been dreading and preparing for has just put itself on his calendar. I spent those 3 days the way the frontier had taught me to spend the hours before a bad night. I made myself ready, and I made myself calm, and I did not let myself rehearse, because rehearsed courage is brittle and breaks at the first surprise. I checked my kit. I stood my other posts. And once, on the last wet afternoon before the banquet, when the child stopped at the colonnade on her way in, I very nearly broke 4 years of silence early, just to tell her to be brave, and did not, because I did not yet know what was coming, and I would not spend the one thing I had, the shock of a wall finding a voice, on comfort when it might be needed for rescue. She said that last afternoon, "There's a big dinner in 3 days." In my mother's hall. She did not sound as though she were looking forward to it. "I have to wear the blue and not spill anything and not be noticed. Verena's going to sing. I asked if I could bring my book to read after, and Nurse said a princess doesn't read at table, and I said am I still a princess then, and Nurse didn't answer." She looked up at me, gray eyes very steady. You'd think a grown-up would know the answer to that. You would, I thought, and went in that night and lay awake, and knew, the way you know weather, that the storm I had decided about in the cold was 3 days off now, and coming, and that I had better be exactly the man I had promised the empty colonnade I would be. So now you know why I stood at the eastern doors of the Hall of Isolde with my whole body wanting to move, and my whole training holding it still, watching a woman tell a motherless child that she was a guest in her mother's house. Let me bring you back into the room, because the room was where it all turned, and the room is worth seeing. The Hall of Isolde was the grandest in the palace, and by a bitter joke of the calendar, was named for the very woman whose daughter now stood shamed at its center. The late queen had loved it, had, in her time, opened it to the city on feast days, and filled it with people who would never otherwise cross a palace threshold. And the king, in the first raw year of his grief, had ordered it renamed in her honor. Morwenna had not been able to undo that. It was one of the few things she had not been able to undo. And I have always believed that a part of why she chose this hall this night, for the shaming of the child, was that the name galled her, and that to bend Isolde's daughter low under Isolde's own name was a double satisfaction she could not resist. The 400 were arranged by precedence down 2 long tables that ran the length of the hall, with the high table on the dais at the far end. King Alaric sat at its center, and I could see him from my post, and even at that distance he looked older than his years. A big man gone gaunt, with a fine gray head and eyes that had learned to look at the middle distance so as not to look at the empty place where a queen had used to sit. Beside him, in the queen's place, sat Morwenna, magnificent in the deep crimson she favored, the state necklace at her throat throwing back the candlelight. Crown Prince Rowan was not there, held at the northern garrison by a border matter, as he so often was, and I have wondered since whether the consort chose a night she knew he would miss. Lord Cassius lounged at the high table's end with the ease of a man who has decided the house is already his. Lady Verena sat near her mother, and was, I will grant her, the only one of that line who looked uneasy at what unfolded. And below the salt, at the very foot of the high table, in a chair a little too large for her, in the pale blue with the loose plate, sat Malin, placed there, I have no doubt, deliberately, in the seat that told the whole realm exactly how much she was thought to matter. She had risen from that seat to fetch her own water, because the footman assigned to her end had been drawn away to serve the consort's guests, and no one had thought to send him back, and the child had been thirsty and had not wanted to make a fuss, and so had crossed the hall herself, and spilled a few drops and been seen. You know the rest of it. You know the words the consort used. Let me tell you now what happened in the long, terrible silence after them, because the silence was not empty. A great deal moved in it, and the moving decided the shape of the night. First, the king did not speak. I watched him. I watched him hear his wife tell his dead wife's daughter that she was a guest in her own home, and I watched a muscle move in his gaunt jaw, and I watched him not speak, and I understood in that moment the whole tragedy of the man. He was not cruel. He was not even, I think, entirely blind to what Morwenna was. He was grief-broken and old and tired past the point where a man can fight in his own house, and he had made, somewhere in the years since Isolde, a private treaty with his own weakness. He would not see what he could not bear to fight. He looked at his plate. A king of Eldermoor looked at his plate while a child of his blood was made small before the realm, and the looking away was, in its way, a louder thing than anything Morwenna had said. The court saw it. When the king looks away, the court learns what it is permitted to do, and 400 people took their instruction from that bowed gray head and settled, uneasily, into the comfortable position of not my business. Second, the consort was not finished. She had the room now, she could feel it, the way she always could, and Morwenna was a woman who, having drawn blood, pressed. Well, she said to the child, gently, terribly, the floor is waiting. Kneel down and clean it. Show the realm how a grateful girl behaves. Or has your mother's daughter grown too proud for honest work? And she smiled, and the smile was the worst of it because it invited the room to smile with her, to make of the child's kneeling a small warm entertainment, a story to be told over the next morning's chocolate. Did you see, at the banquet, the little princess made to scrub the floor? How droll, how the consort keeps her humble. And I watched Malin's hands tighten on the water glass, and I watched her look once down the whole length of the hall toward the eastern doors where the guards stood, not for rescue, I think. She was long past expecting rescue, but simply, I have always believed, to find in that room of 400 laughing strangers the one face she knew would not be laughing. Her eyes found mine. She had promised on the colonnade to keep the secret that I was really a person. She looked at me now as though to say, quietly, across the whole ruined evening, "You see it too, don't you? You at least see it." And then she began, obediently, to lower herself toward the floor in the pale blue in her mother's hall, to clean a spill with her sleeve because the Queen Consort of Eldermoor had told her to, and no one in the world had told her she did not have to. She got as far as one knee. I would like to tell you that I made a grand decision in that instant, that I weighed the office and the oath and the child and the king and chose, with a clear cold mind, to speak. It was not like that. It is never like that when it finally comes. The 3 days of preparation, the gray afternoon on the colonnade, the promise to the empty walk, all of it had already happened in the cold, so that when the moment came hot there was nothing left to decide. There was only the doing. My body moved before I had finished having the thought. I took one step from the eastern doors, out of the line of the wall, into the light of the hall, and the sound of a guard's boot leaving its post in the middle of a state banquet is a sound the palace has not heard in living memory, and it fell into the room like a stone into a still pond, and 400 heads turned toward me. I stopped 3 paces from the child. She had frozen on her one knee, looking up, and the whole hall had gone silent in a wholly different way than before. Not the silence of complicity now, but the silence of astonishment. 400 people watching a piece of furniture stand up and become a man. "Guard!" The consort's voice was ice. She had recovered from her surprise in half a second. I will grant her that she was never slow. "You forget yourself. Return to your post." I did not return to my post. I looked at the child on the floor and I put out my hand, a plain thing, an ungloved hand, though the glove was on it. I mean, I offered it the way you offer a hand to a person, not a princess. And Malin looked at the hand and looked at my face, and I saw her understand that the statue had at last, at the very last, come to life for her. And then I straightened, and I turned to the Queen Consort of Eldermoor, and in front of the king and the court and the whole assembled realm, on the night of the founding, in the Hall of Isolde, I broke 4 years of silence and 11 years of discipline, and the entire office I had built my life upon, and I said 9 words. "A crown does not make you her mother, madam." I said it quietly. That is a thing people who were there always remark on afterward, that I did not shout it, that there was no heat in it at all. I had learned on the frontier that the words that carry furthest are the ones spoken level, and I spoke these level, into a silence so complete that the guttering of the candles was audible, and they went down the whole length of that hall to the high table and the dais and the bowed gray head of the king, and they did not come back. "A crown does not make you her mother, madam." 9 words. I had turned them over in my mind for a fortnight in the cold, and discarded 100 others, because I had understood that whatever I said had to do 3 things at once, and had to do them in the space before anyone could stop my mouth. It had to be true, flatly, undeniably true, a thing no one in the hall could argue. It had to name the wrong precisely so that the whole room saw it named. And it had to give the child back the one thing that had been taken from her, not her comfort, not her dignity even, but the simple fact of who her mother had been, which was the fact the consort had spent 6 years teaching her to forget. A crown does not make you her mother. It said all of it. It said, you are not Malin's mother. You are a woman who married her father and wears a crown, and the crown is an office, not a bond, and it does not give you the right you are exercising, and everyone in this hall knows who her mother was, and her mother is the woman this very hall is named for, and you have made a motherless child kneel on that woman's floor, and I will not stand at my post and watch it. All of that in 9 level words, and the last word, madam, not your majesty, not consort, but the plain address one gives any woman, stripping the title off in the saying, so that for the length of one sentence she was not the Queen Consort of Eldermoor but simply a grown woman who had been cruel to a child, and had just been told so, in front of 400 people, by a man who had nothing left to lose because he had already, in the speaking, lost everything. The child made a sound, a very small sound, half a breath. I did not look at her, I could not look away from the consort. A soldier does not turn his back on the enemy's face, but I heard it, and I have carried it ever since, because it was the sound of a 9-year-old hearing, for the first time in 3 years, an adult in a position of power say aloud in a public room that her mother had been real and had been hers, and that no one, crown or no crown, got to take that away. Whatever came to me after, and a great deal came, that sound made it a bargain I would strike again 1,000 times. For a long moment nothing moved, then everything did at once. The consort rose. She came up out of the Queen's chair in a rustle of crimson, and her face had gone a color I had not seen on it before, not the cold white of her displeasure but a mottled, ugly red, because I had done the one thing her whole patient method could not survive, which was to make the cruelty visible. Morwenna's art depended entirely on deniability, every unkindness dressed as correction, every diminishment framed as care, so that anyone who objected was the one causing a scene. I had stripped the dressing off in 9 words. I had said the true name of the thing, out loud, and now 400 people were looking at it, and it could not be unlooked at, and she knew it, and the knowing was in her furious face. "You," she said, and her voice shook, which I had never heard it do, "will be flogged for that. You will be broken and turned out, and you will never wear that uniform again. Guards!" She flung out her arm toward the eastern doors where my 2 fellows of the detail stood frozen. Take him now." They did not move. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to make this into a story about brave men, and it was not quite. Elm and Corradine, the 2 guards on the eastern doors, were good soldiers and not heroes, and they did not stand fast out of some blaze of conscience. They stood fast because they were caught, for one impossible second, in the oldest crack in the palace guard's whole discipline, the question of whose order to obey. A guard obeys the crown. But the crown at that table was the king, not the consort. Her authority over the household guard was real but derived, a lamp lit from his lamp, and everyone in a red tunic knew it even if it was never said. To seize a fellow guard on the consort's word in front of the king without the king's word, Elm's eyes went to the dais, to Alaric, the way every trained eye in that hall had gone, waiting for the one man whose word actually settled the matter. And the king had not spoken. So the 2 guards hung there, half a step forward and no more, and the consort's arm stayed flung out, and the whole hall held its breath waiting to see which way the king would fall. And I stood 3 paces from a kneeling child with my life in the balance, and understood that everything now turned on a broken old man who had spent 6 years perfecting the art of looking at his plate. "Alaric," the consort turned to him. The fury was still in her, but she reined it, because she was clever even in her rage, and she saw that raw command would not serve her here. She needed the king, needed him to make her order the crown's order, and she reached for him the way she had reached for him 100 times, with the particular blend of appeal and pressure that had governed him for years. "Alaric, you heard him. He insulted your wife, your consort, the mother of this house, before the whole realm. If this is permitted, if a guard may say such a thing to me and stand, then there is no order in Eldermoor at all. Give the word. Have him taken." It was well done. I will grant her it was very well done. She had recast it in 3 sentences from what it was, a man defending a child, into what she needed it to be, a subordinate insulting his sovereign's wife, a matter of order and hierarchy, the kind of thing a king cannot let stand. If Alaric heard only that, he would give the word. He was tired, and she was his wife, and the path of least resistance ran straight through my flogging. I felt the odds of the room, and they were not with me, and I did not lower my offered hand, because whatever else happened, the child was not going to kneel on that floor while I stood there, and if the last thing I did in the king's service was fail to make her rise, I would at least have failed doing it. And then a small, clear voice said, "He told the truth." It was Malin. She had got to her feet, not taken my hand, but got up on her own, which was somehow better, and she stood there in the pale blue with her chin up and her gray eyes on her father, on the king, and she said it again, louder into the vast silence, in the voice of a child who has decided that this once, whatever it costs, she is going to say the true thing that the grown-ups won't. "He told the truth, Papa. She isn't my mother. My mother was Isolde. This is her hall. And I don't think," the small voice wavered and steadied, climbing over the hard word the way a foot climbs a loose stone, "I don't think Mama would want me to clean the floor with my sleeve while everyone watched. I think Mama would want me to stand up. So I'm standing up. I have served kings, and I have stood on a bridge while the water rose, and I have buried a wife, and I thought I knew the whole catalogue of things that can stop a man's breath. But I did not know, until that night, what it is to watch a 9-year-old child face down a full hall of the realm's power with nothing in her hands but the plain truth and the memory of her mother. She was not brave the way soldiers are brave, which is a trained thing, a managed thing. She was brave the way only the very young and the very honest can be, which is to say she simply could not, in that moment, make herself lie, and the not lying looked exactly like courage, and the whole hall saw it, and something in the room shifted that no order from the consort could shift back. Because now it was not a guard's insolence they were looking at. It was a child of the blood royal, the late queen's daughter, standing up in her dead mother's hall and asking her father in front of everyone to let her keep her own mother. And every person at those 2 long tables who had a child of their own, or had ever been a child, or had ever loved a mother now gone, which is to say every person in the hall, felt the thing turn over in their chest, and the comfortable not my business posture the king's bowed head had granted them an hour before cracked straight down the middle. The king looked up. He looked at his daughter. I do not think I have thought about this for years, and I do not think that Alaric had truly looked at Malin, looked in a long time. It is one of the cruelties of the way the consort worked that she had arranged the child to the edges of the king's grieved vision, below the salt, behind the governess, always somewhere he did not quite have to see her and be reminded. But he saw her now. She had made herself impossible not to see. And I watched the King of Eldermoor look at the daughter of the wife he had loved past all policy, standing brave and alone in the wife's own hall, saying her mother's name out loud, and I watched 6 years of careful not seeing break apart on that gray gaunt face, and I understood that the consort had made, at last, her one great mistake. She had pushed the child far enough that the child had stood up, and a standing child the king could not look away from. "Isolde's hall," the king said. His voice was rusty, unused to wait. He said it slowly, as though tasting a thing he had told himself for 6 years not to taste. "Yes. It is Isolde's hall." He looked at the darkened patch of marble, and at the child, and at me, and last of all, for a long time, at his wife. "Morwenna, sit down." "Alaric, sit down." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. There was something in the 2 words, some old iron surfacing from under 6 years of silt, that made even the consort's fury falter. She sat. She sat the way a person sits when the ground they were standing on has moved, and for the first time in the whole evening the mottled red went out of her face and something else came into it, something I had never seen there and would come to know well in the days ahead. Fear. Not fear of me. Fear of the one thing her whole method had been built to prevent, that the king would wake up. He had woken up. "Guardsman," the king said to me, "your name?" "Callan Vaste, your majesty." My voice came out level, which surprised me. "Of the consort's household detail, formerly of the March's western frontier." "The Fenmark Bridge." He said it as a statement. So he had known then, all along, or someone had told him. The King of Eldermoor knew which of his guards had stood on the Fenmark Bridge, and had put such a man on his wife's household detail, and I have wondered since whether that too was not entirely accident. "You left your post." I did, your majesty. You spoke to the consort in a manner no guard may speak. I did that too, your majesty. I would not soften it. If the man was awake at last, I would give him the whole truth and let him do with it what a king does. I broke my office. I knew the cost when I did it. I will not pretend I did not, and I will not ask to be spared it. But I will tell you why, if you will hear it, and then I will accept whatever your majesty judges. The king looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Tell me." I have been asked many times since what I said to the king in the Hall of Isolde with 400 people listening, and the truth is that I do not remember it word for word, because I was not making a speech. I was doing the thing a frontier officer learns to do when the situation has gone past all procedure, and a man has to report the plain shape of what is real, fast, before the window closes. I told him what I had seen. Not accusations. I had no standing to accuse. An accusation is easy to wave away. I told him facts, small and specific and undeniable, the way you lay stones one at a time to build a thing that cannot be knocked over with one breath. I told him that for 3 months on the consort's detail, I had watched the Princess Malin placed below the salt, while the consort's own children sat above it. I told him of the governess who reported the child's every word to the consort, and of the nights with guests when the child was forgotten at table and went to bed without eating, and had trained herself not to make a fuss of it. I did not embellish. I did not need to. The facts, laid bare in that hall, embellished themselves, and I watched them land on the king one by one, and I watched the faces of the court around him, Lady Verena's, gone pale and ashamed, Lord Cassius's, gone careful and calculating, the faces of the lords and ladies who had, an hour ago, laughed the small permitted laugh, and I saw the realm doing, in real time, the arithmetic it had refused to do for 6 years, adding up 100 small remembered cruelties it had witnessed and excused, and finding, at the bottom of the sum, exactly what I had found on the colonnade in the rain. "And tonight, your majesty," I said, "in the Queen's own hall, on the night the realm gathers to honor the line, the consort told the late Queen's daughter that she is a guest in her mother's house, and bid her kneel on the floor and clean a spill with her sleeve for the entertainment of the court. I have stood a great many posts in a great many places and held my tongue through a great deal, as my office requires. But my office is the crown's dignity, your majesty, and there is no dignity of the crown in that. I could hold the wall for many things. I could not hold it for that. I am a guard, but I was a man first, and a father, and there is a floor beneath which a man cannot go and still call himself either. That is all my defense. I offer no other." The silence when I finished was the longest of the night. The consort broke it. She had had time now. I had given her time, laying out my slow stones, and she had used it to gather herself, and when she spoke it was no longer the shaking fury of a woman surprised. It was the smooth, patient, reasonable voice I knew far too well, the voice that had governed the palace for 6 years, and I understood that the real battle was only now beginning. The 9 words had cracked the room open. But a crack is not a victory, and Morwenna was very, very good at sealing cracks. "How moving," she said, and her voice was almost gentle now, almost sorrowful, pitched to the whole hall. "A frontier soldier's tender heart. Alaric, I do not doubt the man believes every word. That is what makes it so dangerous. He has spent 3 months among the household, and he has grown fond of the child, which does him credit, truly, and fondness has made him confuse discipline with cruelty, as fondness always does. Do you know what he calls forgetting a girl at table? Neglect. Do you know what I call it? A busy house on a feast night, and a child who must, like all children, learn that the world does not arrange itself around her. Do you know what he calls placing her below the salt? A humiliation. Do you know what it is? Precedence. The order that holds a court together." She spread her ringed hands, the very picture of patient reason. "I have tried these 6 years to raise a motherless child to be humble and grateful and fit for the world, a hard task, and a thankless one, and one I took on for love of you and duty to your house. And now a soldier who has known her 3 months stands in the founding banquet and calls my care cruelty. And a child who does not like being corrected agrees with him, as children always agree with whoever spares them the correction. Is this to be the new order in Eldermoor? Are we to let the guard and the nursery decide how princesses are raised? It was masterful. I felt the room tilt back toward her under it, felt some of the lords who had done the arithmetic against her begin, uneasily, to undo it, because she had handed them the reasonable sounding out, the middle path, the story in which no one was cruel and no one was a hero, and it was all just a matter of a soft-hearted soldier and a strict but well-meaning stepmother, and a spilled glass of water blown out of all proportion. That is the deadliest thing such a woman does. She does not deny the facts. She reframes them into reasonableness and offers the comfortable middle to a room that would much rather be comfortable, and most rooms take it. The king might have taken it too. I saw him waver. 6 years of that voice had worn grooves in him, and the grooves were deep, and he was tired, and the reasonable middle was right there, warm and easy. Call it a misunderstanding. Restore the peace, deal with the guard quietly, let the evening recover. I saw the temptation of it move across his gaunt face. And I could not stop it, because I had said my piece and had no more stones to lay. I had shown the room the shape of the thing, but the consort had shown them a way to look away from it again, and it was going to come down, after everything, to whether a broken old king had the strength to refuse the easy path in his own hall. He did not have it. I say that plainly because it is the truth, and because the truth is more interesting than the comforting lie. King Alaric, left to his own worn strength, would have taken the reasonable middle. I saw him gathering himself to take it, and this story would have ended there, the peace restored, the child returned to her place below the salt, the guard quietly broken in a week's time when the hall had emptied, and the consort's 6-year work resumed with one lesson added, which is that even the small rebellion of a fond soldier can be smoothed away by a clever woman with the king's ear. That is how it would have gone. It is not how it went, because at that exact moment at the great doors at the far end of the Hall of Isolde, the western doors, the ceremonial ones, the ones through which the founding procession comes each year, there was a commotion of arriving and a herald's startled voice, and the doors were opened not by the herald's plan but by the simple force of someone on the other side who did not care to wait, and into the hall, still in her traveling cloak, rode dusty and gray-haired and blazing, strode the king's sister, the Princess Adela, home 3 months early from the southern courts, into the middle of the worst night of the palace's recent memory, at the one moment when the whole thing hung in the balance. I did not know then why she had come home early. I learned it later, and it belongs later in the telling. What mattered in the moment was that of all the people in the realm who might have walked through those doors, the one who walked through them was the single person Morwenna's smooth, reasonable voice had no power over at all, because Adela had known Isolde, and had loved her, and had watched this exact thing being done to Isolde's daughter for 6 years from a distance and been too far away to stop it, and had, it turned out, come racing home for reasons of her own that dovetailed with this night as though the fates had arranged it. She stopped just inside the doors. She took in the room in one sweep of her hard old eyes, the risen consort, the standing child, the guard 3 paces off his post, the spill on the marble, the king caught in the act of reaching for the easy way out, and she read the whole of it in about 4 seconds, the way old campaigners read a field. And her voice, when it came, was not smooth and not reasonable and not gentle at all. "What," said Princess Adela, into the ringing hall, "is my niece doing on her feet in the middle of this floor, and why does everyone in this room look guilty?" No one answered her. 400 people who had, moments before, been quite happy to let a clever woman talk them back into comfort, discovered that they had nothing to say to a hard old princess in a traveling cloak who was looking at them one by one and finding them wanting. Adela did not wait long for an answer. She never did. She crossed the hall, that same vast floor the child had crossed alone an hour before, Only Adela crossed it the way a general crosses a field she owns, and she went not to the king, and not to the consort, but to the child, and she stopped in front of Malin and looked down at her, and her hard face did a thing I would not have thought it could do. It softened. "Are you hurt?" she asked the girl, quietly, just the two of them though the whole hall heard it. "No, Aunt Adela." Malin's chin was still up, but I saw it tremble now that a friendly face had come, the way we can only let ourselves shake once rescue arrives. "I spilled some water, and I stood up." "You stood up." Adela considered this gravely, as though it were a report from the front, which in a way it was. "Good, that is exactly right. A daughter of Isolde stands up." She put one road-worn hand on the child's shoulder, and then she turned, still with her hand on Malin's shoulder, and faced the high table, and the softness went out of her like a light switched off. "Now, someone is going to tell me why my niece was on her knees on this floor when I came in, and someone is going to tell me the truth, because I have had 3 days on bad roads, and I am not in a mood to be lied to." "Alaric." The king opened his mouth, and I watched the reasonable middle die in his throat, because it is one thing to take the easy path in front of a court that wants you to, and quite another to take it in front of a sister who has known you since you were a boy and can see straight through you, and who is standing there with her hand on the wrong child's shoulder, daring you to. Adela's arrival had changed the arithmetic of the room again, and this time it had changed it for good, because she was the one force in Eldermoor that Morwenna's whole method could not touch. An equal, older than the consort in the house, immune to her charm, unafraid of her displeasure, and armed, as I was about to learn, with knowledge of her own. "Morwenna corrected the girl," the king said. It was a half-truth, and it came out weak, and I saw him hear how weak it sounded, and I saw him hate it. For a spill. She went too far, the guard. The guard! Adela's eyes came to me. She looked at me the way she looked at everything, fast and complete, taking my measure in a glance, and I stood and let her take it. "You are the one who left his post." "Yes, your highness." And said she glanced at the room, gauging what had been said, and someone near enough murmured it to her, and I watched her hear the 9 words, and I watched something move behind her hard old eyes. "A crown does not make you her mother." She repeated it slowly. Then, to my astonishment, the corner of her mouth moved. "Well, that is 9 words truer than anything else said in this hall tonight, I should think. What is your name, guardsman?" "Callan Vaste, your highness." "Remember it," she said to the room at large, "because I intend to." And then she turned to the consort, and the 2 women looked at each other across the length of the high table, and the whole hall understood that it was watching, at last, the thing it had waited 6 years to see. The one person who was not afraid of Morwenna, facing her, on a night when the facing could not be smoothed away. "Adela," the consort said. She had regathered herself once more. She was indefatigable, I will give her that, and she reached for the reasonable voice again, the one that had nearly won the room. "You are tired, and you have walked into the middle of a small domestic matter and drawn the worst conclusion. The child spilled water. I corrected her sharply, too sharply perhaps. The night has been long. It is nothing that need concern." "I am going to stop you there," Adela said, "because I know why I came home and you do not, and you are about to say a great many things you will wish you had not." She reached into the traveling cloak, and she drew out a folded packet of papers, sealed, road-creased, and she held them up so the king could see them, and her voice, when it came, was pitched to carry to every corner of the Hall of Isolde. "I came home 3 months early, brother, because a letter reached me in the south, an old letter, from a source I trust with my life, telling me that in your house, in your name, and with your seal, matters were being set in motion regarding the estate and the standing of Isolde's daughter that you would never have permitted if you had been awake to them. I did not believe it. I came home to disprove it. I stopped at the estate office on my way through the city not 4 hours ago, and I read the record with my own eyes, and I will tell you now, before the whole court, exactly what your consort has been doing while you looked at your plate." The hall did not breathe. For 6 years, Adela said. She has not merely been unkind to that child, Alaric, though she has been that, and this room has watched it and said nothing, and every one of you should be ashamed. Her eyes swept them, and men who commanded provinces looked at the floor. She has been building a case. Small papers. Reassignments of the late Queen's property held in trust for the child until she comes of age, trust of which the consort has quietly made herself and her son the administrators. Rooms in the Queen's wing reallocated. Isolde's own bequests, the things she left in her will specifically to her daughter, folded one by one into the general estate for the good order of the house, and thence by 100 small legal steps toward Lord Cassius. It is patient. It is deniable. Each single step is nothing, a reasonable administrative tidying, and that is precisely how I know whose hand drew it, because I have never in my life met anyone but Morwenna who could commit a theft in 6 years of paperwork, so that no single page is a crime. She turned the packet in her hand. The humiliation you all watched tonight was not cruelty for its own sake. It was the last of the work. Teach the realm on the founding night that the girl is nobody, a guest, she said, a guest in her mother's house. And when the day comes that the estate is settled and Isolde's daughter has been left with nothing, no one will think to ask why, because you will all have long since agreed that she was nobody in particular. That is the machine you have been standing in, brother. That is what a spilled glass of water was really about. I have relived a great many moments of that night, but the one I return to most is the king's face as his sister laid it out, because I watched a man wake fully from a 6-year sleep in the space of a single speech, and it is a terrible thing to see. Everything the consort's smooth, reasonable voice had rebuilt, Adela's hard plain one demolished, not with feeling but with the estate record, 4 hours old, in her hand. And Alaric, who could dismiss a guard's fondness and a child's tears and even his own uneasy conscience, could not dismiss the paper. He looked at it. He looked at his wife. He looked at his daughter, standing under his sister's protecting hand in the pale blue in the hall named for the woman he had loved. And the grief that had made him passive for 6 years turned, at last, in front of the whole realm, into something else. The thing grief becomes when it finally remembers that the dead leave the living in our keeping, and that to fail the living is to fail the dead twice. He rose. King Alaric rose from the center of the high table, and he was old and gaunt, and it was not a swift rising, but there was iron in it, the old iron of the man he had been before he broke, and the whole hall came to its feet with him, because you do not stay seated when the king stands with that face. "Bring me the estate record," the king said. His voice did not shake now. "All of it tonight. Wake the officers of the estate, and the keeper of the late Queen's will have them before me by morning, and we will read every page my sister speaks of, and if it is as she says," he looked at Morwenna, and there was nothing warm left in the look at all, "then it will be undone, every page of it, and there will be an accounting." The founding banquet did not resume. There are some nights a hall cannot recover from, and this was one. The king gave the word, and the great tables were cleared, and 400 people went out into the cold with a story they would be telling for the rest of their lives. And the story they told, I have heard it come back to me 100 times, changed a little each telling. The way true stories are was not about a guard's insolence at all. It was about a child who stood up in her mother's hall, and a soldier who said 9 words, and a queen who was, that night, at long last seen. Morwenna did not go quietly, of course. Women like Morwenna never do. The whole architecture of them is built to prevent the one thing that had just happened, and when it happens anyway they claw at the pieces. In the days that followed she did everything a clever cornered woman can do. She wept, and she raged, and she refrained. And she reminded the king of 6 years of marriage and of the loneliness she had eased and the house she had kept, and some of it was even true, and none of it, in the end, could stand against the estate record, because Adela had been exactly right, and the officers of the estate, once the king had them before him with the will of the late queen open on the table, could not undraw a single one of the small patient papers. And page by page, over 3 gray mornings, the whole 6-year machine was laid bare, and the king read it, and there was no reasonable middle left anywhere in it to hide in. I was not in the room for those mornings. I was a guard, and the accounting of the estate was above my office, and in any case my own accounting was still pending. For whatever else the night had turned, the plain fact remained that I had left my post at a state banquet and spoken to the Queen Consort in a manner no guard may speak, and the office does not bend for a good reason any more than it bends for a bad one. And I knew it, and I waited for the summons the way a soldier waits for a verdict. With my kit in order, and my conscience clear, and no illusions about which of those two the regulations care for. The summons came on the 4th day. I was brought not before a disciplinary board, as I had expected, but to the king's private study, a smaller, warmer room than the great hall, walled in books, with a fire and 2 chairs, and on the mantel a portrait of a plain, clever-faced woman with gray eyes I recognized, because I had seen those same eyes look up at me on a rainy colonnade and ask whether a princess stops being a princess. Isolde. So this was where he kept her. Not in the state rooms where the consort would see, but here, in the one room that was only his. The king was there, and Princess Adela, and to my surprise, the Crown Prince Rowan, home at last from the northern garrison, a grave, broad-shouldered man very like his father must have been before grief thinned him. And in a chair by the fire, small and composed, in an ordinary dress and not the ceremonial blue, with the battered green book in her lap, sat Malin. "Guardsman Vaste," the king said, "sit." I did not sit. A guard does not sit in the king's presence, verdict or no verdict, and I said so, and I saw the corner of Adela's mouth do the thing it had done in the hall. "He'll stand," she told her brother. "Let him. It is what he is for. It is, I gather, rather what he is best at." "Then he will stand," the king said, "and hear this standing." He was quiet a moment, and I watched him arrange the thing he meant to say, an old man unused, after 6 years of silence, to saying the true things aloud. "You broke your office in my hall. That is a fact, and I will not pretend it is not. And I will not pretend that a king can let it pass unmarked, because a guard who decides for himself when to leave his post is a danger to the very crown he serves, and you know that better than I, having served on the frontier where the cost of it is paid in blood. If I were only a king, Vaste, I would have to break you for it, whatever the reason, and I would be right too." "I know it, your majesty," I said. "I have always known it. I do not ask to be spared." "I know you do not. That is rather the difficulty." He almost smiled, and it was a worn, sad, honest thing. A man who broke his office to be a hero, who wanted the reward of it, him I could break with a clear conscience because he did it for himself. But you did not do it for yourself. You did it knowing it would cost you everything and expecting to pay, and you were 3 days making your peace with the paying before the night ever came. My sister has been asking questions, and I know now about the colonnade and the rain and the empty walk where you decided, alone in the cold, what you would do. You did not lose your discipline. You spent it. There is a difference, and I have had 6 years of proof in my own house of what happens to a man who will not spend his discipline when the moment demands it, and I will not punish another man for succeeding where I failed. He rose and he came around the desk, and he stood in front of me, king to soldier, and he said, "So here is the accounting, and it is mine to give, and I have thought hard on it. You will not be broken. You will not stand the consort's detail again. There will be no consort's detail to stand." He let that land. "The marriage is ended. It will be done with dignity, for the sake of the house and the realm, but it is ended, and Morwenna will withdraw to her own estate in the north, and Lord Cassius and Lady Varenna with her, and the property of the late queen will be restored, every page of it, to the daughter it was left to. That is Adela's doing and the estate officers, and it is already in hand." I said nothing. It was not my place to speak, and I had, in any case, no words. "As for you," the king went on, "I have a different post in mind. My daughter," and here he looked at the small, composed figure by the fire, and his voice changed, roughened, the way a voice does over a thing long neglected and newly precious. My daughter has had these 6 years, everything a princess is given and nothing a child needs. She has had governesses who reported on her and a household that forgot her and a father who, he stopped. He was an honest man now, whatever he had been. And a father who looked at his plate. That is going to change. She will have her own household, chosen by my sister and answerable to me. And at the head of its guard, I want a man I know will leave his post for her when leaving his post is the only honorable thing to do, and stand it otherwise like the wall he is. I can think of exactly one such man in the realm. The post is yours if you will take it, captain of the Princess Malin's household guard. I have been offered things in my life. I was decorated on the Fenmark Bridge, and I have been thanked by men whose lives I held, and I did not, at any of it, feel what I felt standing in that warm book-walled room under the gray eyes of a dead queen's portrait, being asked by a woken king to guard the child I had promised an empty colonnade I would give back to herself. I looked at Malin. She was looking at me over the top of the battered green book, and she was not smiling, quite. She was a grave child, and grave children do not spend their gravity cheaply. But her chin was up, and her eyes were her mother's, and she gave me a small nod, the exact grave nod of a fellow prisoner of stillness, recognizing that the statue had, after all, been a person the whole time. "I will take it, Your Majesty," I said. "It will be the honor of my life." It has been. I am writing this an old man now, in the season of my own retirement, and I have served the Princess Malin's household these many years, and I have watched the grave, lonely child of the rainy colonnade become a woman her mother would have known at once for her own, plain-spoken and clever, and easy in a stable or a schoolroom, loved by the common people the way Isolde was loved, and comfortable, I am glad to say, in her own skin, in her own name. In a house that at long last treats her like what she has always been. She reads at table when she likes. No one has ever again suggested that she is a guest anywhere in Eldermoor. And on the anniversary of that founding night, every year, she has the Hall of Isolde open to the city as her mother used to, and fills it with people who would otherwise never cross a palace threshold. And there is never a night I stand that door that I do not think of a child crossing that same floor alone with a glass of water, and of how close the realm came to letting her kneel. Morwenna withdrew to the north, as the king had said, with dignity preserved for the house's sake and nothing preserved for her own. I will not pretend I felt no satisfaction in it, though I have learned that satisfaction is a poor thing to build a life on, and I did not build mine on it. Lord Cassius, deprived of the inheritance he had spent 6 years quietly folding toward himself, made what noise he could, and then, finding no one in the realm inclined to listen, went silent. Lady Verena, I will say this for her, wrote the Princess Malin a letter some years later that I am told was a true and sorrowful thing, and I am told the princess answered it kindly, because she is her mother's daughter and her mother would have. The estate was restored to the last page. Isolde's bequests came home to the child they were left to. And King Alaric, in the years the fates allowed him after that night, was a father again, awkwardly at first and then not awkwardly. And I believe he died, for he is gone now. And the Crown Prince Rowan reigns, and reigns well, a good deal more at peace than he had any right to expect, having remembered in time that the dead leave the living in our keeping. And Princess Adela, who came home 3 months early on the strength of an old letter and a bad feeling and arrived at the one moment when the whole thing hung in the balance, took the child under her wing entire, and taught her, I think, most of what she knows about standing up, which the girl had begun to learn on her own on a spilled floor, but which a hard old campaigning aunt was well placed to finish. They are much alike now, those two, though one is gray and one is young. Adela never once let me thank her. "You said 9 words, guardsman," she told me the one time I tried. "I read some papers. The 9 words were the harder thing. Papers are easy. It is saying the true thing out loud in the room while it costs you that nobody ever wants to do." And she was right, as she generally was. People ask me sometimes when they learn I was the guard from that night, whether I did not regret it, whether, in the long moment before I stepped off my post, I did not weigh the 11 years of frontier service and the 4 years of palace discipline and the whole edifice of my career against a wet patch of marble, and think better of it. And I tell them the truth, which is that there was nothing to weigh because I had done the weighing already alone on a rainy colonnade weeks before, when a lonely child asked me whether a princess stops being a princess if no one treats her like one, and I stood there and held the wall and did not answer and hated myself for it and swore that if the day came I would answer. The day came. I answered. It took 9 words. I have thought a great deal over the years about why those particular 9 were the ones. There were braver sounding things I might have said, and angrier ones, and there were things that would have been more about me, my defiance, my courage, my willingness to fall. But those would have made the moment mine, and the moment was never mine. It was hers. A child had been told, patiently, cruelly, for 3 years, that her mother did not count, that the crown a stranger wore had made that stranger her mother and unmade the woman who bore her, and the whole realm had agreed to it by looking away. And all that was needed, all that was ever needed, was for one person to say, out loud in the room while it cost them, the plain true thing that everyone knew and no one would speak. A crown does not make you her mother, madam. 9 words. I did not save the child. She saved herself when she stood up. I only made it possible for her to hear, in the worst moment of her young life, that the truth was still the truth even when the whole world had agreed to forget it, and that somewhere in a hall full of people who had chosen to look away, one man had been looking the entire time. That is the whole of the office in the end. Not the bearskin and the white gloves and the 40 minutes of stillness, though those are real and I honored them. The office is this: to stand at the wall and see everything and hold your tongue through every small wrong that is not yours to right, until the day comes when a single true thing said aloud will give a child back to herself, and then to say it and take what comes, and count it all your life after, the best day's work you ever did. I stood the wall for many years more, but I was never, after that night, only a wall again. She had told me, on the colonnade in the rain, that she would keep it a secret that I was really a person. She kept it. And I have tried every day since to be worthy of the secret, to be, when the stillness is what honor asks, the stillest man in any room, and to be, when the moment finally asks the other thing, the man who steps off the wall and says the 9 words, whatever they cost, because there is a floor beneath which a man cannot go and still call himself a man. And I found mine at last on a marble one, 3 paces from a kneeling child, in a hall that bears her mother's name.